They called it a family Thanksgiving. That's the exact phrase my mother used when she phoned me in October. I was sitting in my car outside the school where I work, eating a sad desk salad I'd packed that morning, and her voice came through the speaker warm and cheerful, the way it only ever gets when she wants something. "We're doing a proper family Thanksgiving this year," she said. "At the house. Everyone together." I should have asked more questions. I know that now. But I was tired from a full week of parent-teacher interviews. I had a stack of report cards waiting on my kitchen table, and honestly, part of me still wanted to believe her. Part of me always wanted to believe her. "Will Grandma be there?" I asked. "Of course," she said. "That's the whole point." I told her I'd be there. I drove 4 hours from Ottawa to Kingston on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. The leaves were turning that particular shade of orange and red that makes the highway between the two cities look almost impossibly beautiful, and I had the radio on and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, and I let myself feel something close to hopeful. My grandmother was 81 years old and had been living alone in the family house on Sydenham Street since my grandfather passed 3 years earlier. I didn't get to see her nearly enough. The idea of a proper holiday weekend together, everyone around the table, her pot roast, the good tablecloth she only ever brought out for occasions, it made the 4-hour drive feel like nothing. I pulled into the driveway just before 6 o'clock. The front porch light was on. My brother's truck was not in the driveway. Neither was my parents' Subaru. I told myself they'd stepped out for groceries. I let myself in with the spare key I've kept on my ring since university, and I called out into the house. And the only answer I got was the sound of the television coming from the back sitting room, the local news, volume turned up the way my grandmother keeps it because she won't wear her hearing aids. She was in her armchair by the window. She had a blanket across her knees even though the house was warm, and she was watching the weather forecast with the focused expression she gets when she's trying to read lips. She looked up when I came in, and her whole face opened up the way it does, that particular smile that has always made me feel like the most important person in any room. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "You came." The way she said it, like she'd been hoping but not quite counting on it, sat strangely in my chest. "Of course I came," I said. I kissed her cheek and sat on the footstool beside her chair and held her hand, which was cool and paper-thin the way old hands get, and I asked her where everyone else was. She was quiet for a moment. She reached over to the side table and handed me a piece of paper torn from the notepad my mother keeps by the kitchen phone, the one with the little chickadees printed along the top. "Claire, flight to Vancouver leaves at 4. Back Sunday night. Groceries in the fridge. Grandma's prescriptions on the counter. You know the drill. Love, Mom." I read it twice. I sat there in the warm sitting room with the television murmuring and my grandmother's hand in mine, and I read that note twice, and I waited for the feeling to arrive, the anger, the hurt, the outrage. I'd felt those things before, in relation to my family. I knew them well. But what came instead was something flatter and older. Something that felt almost like recognition. "You know the drill." Because I did know the drill, didn't I? I had always known the drill. "My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old and I teach grade 4 at a public school in Ottawa. I am the younger of 2 children, and the only daughter, and I have spent most of my adult life being the responsible one, the one who answers the phone, the one who shows up, the one who handles the things that need handling. My brother Ryan is 36 and works in commercial real estate in Vancouver and has, as far as I can tell, never once been handed a chickadee notepad and told, 'You know the drill.' My parents are not bad people. I want to be careful to say that, because it matters. They are not villains. They are not cruel. They are simply people who learned early that I would do what needed doing, and they never unlearned it. My mother is a retired pharmacist who has strong opinions about wine and weak opinions about fairness. My father follows her lead in most things. Ryan follows his own interests in all things, which has always somehow been treated as admirable rather than convenient. And my grandmother has always been the exception. She has always seen me clearly. Her name is Dorothy. She grew up in Sudbury, moved to Kingston when she married my grandfather at 23, raised 4 children in the house on Sydenham Street, and has lived there alone for 3 years now, with her hearing aids she won't wear and her pot roast recipe she keeps in her head, and a stubbornness about independence that I have always privately admired and been terrified by, in equal measure. I called my mother from the kitchen while my grandmother dozed in her chair. The call went to voicemail. I called my father. Same. I texted my brother. Did you know they were going to Vancouver? He replied 11 minutes later. Yeah. Sorry, should have said something. You good? I stared at that message for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and I went to check what was actually in the fridge. There were groceries, to be fair. Enough for a few days: bread, eggs, some deli meat, a container of soup from the grocery store deli. My grandmother's prescriptions were where the note said. 2 orange bottles lined up neatly on the counter. One I recognized as her blood pressure medication. The other, I had to look up. It was for a mild cardiac arrhythmia that, as far as I knew, she had been managing for about 8 months. I had not known about the arrhythmia. I stood in my grandmother's kitchen on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I thought, when did I stop being told things? Or was I never told, and I only now noticed the shape of the silence? I went back to the sitting room, and I turned off the television, and I asked my grandmother if she was hungry. Her face did something complicated. I wasn't sure anyone was coming, she said. I'm here, I said. I'm staying the whole weekend. She squeezed my hand. Good, she said. Like it was simple. Because for her it was. I made scrambled eggs and toast because it was late and I didn't want to go to the grocery store, and we sat at the kitchen table together, and she told me about her week. Her neighbor Patricia had brought over zucchini bread. The doctor had cleared her to drive locally, but she'd let the car insurance lapse and hadn't gotten around to renewing it. She'd been watching a nature documentary series about the Canadian Shield and found it tremendously soothing. I listened. I asked questions. I refilled her tea. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table alone and looked up the cost of the insurance lapse and the renewal process in Ontario, and I made a list of everything that seemed to need attention, and I did not cry, but I came close. The next morning, Thanksgiving Thursday, I drove to the grocery store on Princess Street before my grandmother woke up. I bought a small turkey and the things for stuffing and cranberry sauce, and a sweet potato casserole I'd been making since I found the recipe in a magazine at my first apartment. I bought flowers, the cheap ones near the door, orange and yellow and exactly right for the season. I bought apple cider and a good bottle of Ontario Riesling because my grandmother likes a small glass of white wine with her holiday dinner. She was in her housecoat at the kitchen table with her morning tea when I came back. She looked at the grocery bags and then at me, and something in her expression shifted, a softening, or maybe a settling, like something she'd been bracing against had passed. You didn't have to do all that, she said. I know, I said. I wanted to. We cooked together most of the morning. She sat at the kitchen table and directed the stuffing from memory cornbread base. Sage, onion, celery, chicken broth. Not too much broth, Claire. You don't want it soupy, while I did the chopping and mixing, and the occasional panicked question about oven temperatures. She told me stories I had never heard. About the first Thanksgiving she and my grandfather hosted after they bought the house, when the oven element burned out at noon and they had to call every neighbor on the street looking for oven space. About the year my father, then a new boyfriend, showed up with a grocery store pumpkin pie, and her mother, my great-grandmother, had said nothing, but had looked at it for a long moment, with an expression that still made my grandmother laugh. 40 years later, I laughed too. I hadn't laughed easily in a while, and it felt like something loosening. You're a good girl, she said, apropos of nothing, when we were putting the turkey in. You don't have to say that, Grandma. I know I don't have to, she said. I say what I mean, you know that. I did know that. It was one of the things I'd always loved most about her. My parents called at 2 o'clock on Thanksgiving afternoon. I was in the middle of making the casserole and I let it ring. My mother texted, "Hope you girls are having a nice day. We're at Granville Island, gorgeous weather," with a photo of herself and my father on a dock somewhere, both of them smiling, my mother's sunglasses pushed up on her head. I showed it to my grandmother. She looked at it for a moment. Did she ask how I'm doing? She said. She said she hoped we were having a nice day. My grandmother made a sound I'd heard her make exactly twice in my life, before, a small, dry sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, the sound of a person acknowledging something they would rather not acknowledge. Your mother loves me, she said. I want you to know that I believe that. She just loves her own life more. I didn't know what to say to that. Sit down, Claire, she said. The casserole can wait a few minutes. I sat across from her at the kitchen table where I had eaten hundreds of meals over the course of my life. Outside the window, the maple in the backyard was almost completely turned, that deep, saturated red that only lasts about a week. My grandmother folded her hands on the table. I've been meaning to have a conversation with you, she said. I've been waiting for the right time, and I suppose this is as right as any. She told me she'd had a meeting with her lawyer in September. A man named Gerald, who had been her lawyer for 20 years and apparently had excellent judgment about when to drink tea and when to drink something stronger. She had updated her will. She had 4 children, she explained, and she loved all 4 of them. She had, over the years, helped them all down payments, tuition, the occasional crisis. She had been careful to be fair, but the will she'd had prior to September had been written when my grandfather was alive and when things had been different, and in the 3 years since he'd passed, she had learned things about people, about who made time and who made excuses, about who called because they wanted to talk and who called because they wanted something. I'm not a sentimental woman, she said. I'm a practical one. I've tried to be practical about this. I asked her not to tell me the specifics. I told her it made me uncomfortable. She smiled. It should make you a little uncomfortable, she said. That means your instincts are good. But I want you to know that I've done something deliberate, and I've done it with a clear head, and I need you to understand that it has nothing to do with this weekend. I decided before this weekend. This weekend only. She paused and looked at the maple tree out the window, confirmed what I already knew. She went to bed early that evening. I washed the dishes alone in the quiet kitchen, the radio on low, the leftover turkey covered in the fridge. Through the window, the sky was the dark, clear blue of a cold Ontario night. I felt something I couldn't quite name, not happiness exactly, something more complicated than that, something in the vicinity of mattering. My parents and Ryan came home on Sunday evening. I was still there because my grandmother had asked me to stay, and because I'd called the school office on Friday to arrange a supply teacher for Monday. My principal had been understanding. My principal, unlike certain members of my family, is a reasonable person. I was helping my grandmother with a puzzle, one of the 1,000-piece Canadian landscapes she likes, when the front door opened and my parents came in with the slightly dazed, over-caffeinated energy of people who have just gotten off a plane. My father was carrying a paper bag from the Vancouver airport gift shop. My mother had her coat half on. "Oh good, you're still here," my mother said, with the specific warmth people deploy when they haven't done anything wrong in their own estimation. She hugged my grandmother. She said Vancouver had been incredible. There'd been this amazing seafood restaurant. Ryan had known the chef. Ryan came in behind them. He nodded at me. Hey, I said. My grandmother looked up from the puzzle. "Did you have a nice trip?" she said. "Wonderful," my mother said. "Just what we needed." My grandmother said nothing to that. She looked at the puzzle piece in her hand and placed it with the focused precision of someone who says what she means and has decided that what she means right now is nothing. My parents stayed for an hour. My mother microwaved some of the leftover turkey, the same turkey she had not been here to cook, and made pleased sounds about it. My father asked about the prescriptions, whether everything was sorted. I told him what I'd found and what I'd managed, keeping my voice neutral. He nodded, as if I had delivered a status report, which I supposed I had. When they left, my grandmother walked them to the door. She hugged my mother. She said goodnight to my father. She watched them back out of the driveway, and she closed the door and turned around and looked at me. "Thank you," she said. It was a simple sentence, and she meant everything in it. I drove back to Ottawa on Monday morning. I had a full day of teaching ahead 22 9-year-olds who would want to talk about their Thanksgiving long weekends, who had probably eaten too much and watched football and fought with their siblings over the television remote, normal chaotic family things. I looked forward to it, honestly. 9-year-olds are very straightforward about what they need. I called my grandmother when I got home that night. We talked for 40 minutes about the puzzle, which she'd nearly finished, and about a book she was reading, and about whether Patricia next door seemed to be having a hard autumn, and about nothing in particular. Before we hung up, she said, "Call me Wednesday?" "I'll call you Wednesday," I said. I did not hear anything significant from my family for almost 4 months. And then, in February, my grandmother had a fall. She was in the kitchen, and she slipped on a mat she'd had for 30 years and hadn't replaced because she liked it, and she was 81 years old, and her hip took the landing. She managed to call 911 herself, which the paramedics told me later was significant, and she managed to call me from the hospital, and she told me very calmly that she had broken her hip and she was going to need surgery, and she was sorry to bother me on a Tuesday. I was on the road within the hour. I stayed in Kingston for 2 weeks. I took emergency family leave, which in Ontario you're entitled to for situations involving seriously ill family members. I slept in my old room and I drove to the hospital twice a day, and I talked to the surgeons and the physiotherapists and the discharge planners, and I asked every question I could think of and wrote the answers in a notebook. My mother came for 4 days in the middle of it. My father came for a weekend. Ryan sent flowers. After the surgery and the initial hospital stay, my grandmother needed rehabilitation several weeks at a facility on the east end of the city. Occupational therapy, physio, the works. She hated it. In the characteristically practical way, she hated anything that felt like unnecessary fuss. But she did the work. She always did the work. During one of those weeks, while she was in rehab and I was staying in her house to be nearby, her lawyer Gerald called. He was looking for her, and I explained the situation, and he said he was sorry to hear it, and that he would call her mobile directly. Then he paused and said, "Are you Claire?" I said I was. He said, "She talks about you quite a lot." I didn't know what to do with that. I said thank you and hung up. My grandmother came home in March. I helped her set up the modifications, the grab bars, the non-slip mats replacing the old mat that had been there for 30 years, the shower chair she'd initially refused and then conceded to with relatively good grace. I stayed another week to make sure the routine was working and that Patricia next door had a key and knew when to check in. On my last night there, my grandmother gave me an envelope. "Don't open it now," she said. "Take it home. Read it when you're alone." It was a letter. 4 pages in her handwriting, which is small and extremely precise in the way of someone who learned to write with a fountain pen and never stopped caring about it. She wrote about my grandfather, and about the life they'd built, and about what she hoped the house on Sydenham Street would mean to whoever lived there next. She wrote about her children, and about love, about the different shapes it takes, and the different ways people show it, and the ways you can love someone very much, and still fail them without noticing. She wrote about me. About the Thanksgiving weekend and the scrambled eggs at 6 o'clock and the stuffing recipe and the maple tree and the puzzle. About what it had meant to her to not be alone when she expected to be. She wrote that she had tried to be a practical woman her whole life and she would not stop now, and that Gerald had done good work and everything was in order, and that I shouldn't feel guilty, her word, guilty, because guilt implied wrongdoing, and the only thing I had ever done was show up. Showing up, she wrote, is the whole thing. Most people don't understand that until it's too late. You've always understood it. That's not nothing, Claire. That's everything. I read the letter sitting at my kitchen table in Ottawa on a Thursday evening in March, with a cup of tea going cold beside me. Outside my window, the last of the winter was doing what late Ontario winters do, that ambivalent gray slush that can't decide whether to be snow or rain, and I cried, which I don't do easily, and hadn't done the whole weekend she was in the hospital, and I let myself do it. My grandmother passed away in October, 8 months later. She was in her own home, in her own bed, and it was, by every account, peaceful. She'd had a good summer, the garden, Patricia next door, a puzzle of the street. Lawrence, she'd been quietly triumphant about finishing. She and I had spoken on the phone every Wednesday without exception, and 3 times I'd driven down for the weekend, no occasion required. The will reading was in November, in Gerald's office on Johnson Street. My parents were there. Ryan flew in from Vancouver. There was an aunt from my grandmother's side I hadn't seen in years, who sat very still and seemed to be doing mental arithmetic. My grandmother had been straightforward, as she always was. Her 4 children received equal portions of the investment accounts, approximately $80,000 each, which Gerald explained, reflected the growth on savings she and my grandfather had built over 50 years of careful living. The contents of the house she divided thoughtfully among people she loved. The house itself, the house on Sydenham Street, where she had raised 4 children and hosted 30-some Thanksgiving dinners, and kept the chickadee notepad by the phone she left to me. My mother made a sound I had never heard her make before. My father looked at the floor. Ryan, to his credit, or to his real estate instincts, said nothing, and looked at nothing, with a very concentrated expression. Gerald read through the rest of the document with the steady, unflappable manner of a man who had been doing this for a long time, and understood that sometimes the quiet in a room after a reading needs to be allowed to exist. There was a note at the end, a small addendum, which he read without editorial comment. I have tried to be fair my whole life, and I believe this is fair. Claire showed up. She showed up when no one asked her to. She showed up when it was inconvenient, and she showed up without expectation. The house should belong to someone who understands what a home is for. My mother said, on the way out of the office, that it wasn't what she'd expected. I told her I understood. She said she hoped I understood that none of it changed how things were between us. I said I understood that too. I didn't know in that moment what I would do with the house. I still don't know entirely. I know that I drove to Sydenham Street after the meeting, and I stood on the front porch for a long time and looked at the maple in the backyard, which was past peak but still holding some red, and I thought about scrambled eggs and cornbread stuffing, and a puzzle of the Canadian shield, and a woman who said what she meant, and meant everything she said. I have the chickadee notepad. I took it when I was clearing things out. It seemed important to have. I teach 22 9-year-olds in Ottawa, and I drive to Kingston about once a month now. And every Wednesday, I sit with the absence of a phone call that will not come, and I feel it the way you feel, something that was load-bearing in your life, the specific weight of what's no longer there. But I know I showed up, and she knew it too. That turns out to be enough. More than enough. It turns out to be, as she said, everything.